Need a young scientist to keep those older scientists active, huh?
Yeah, I keep them on their toes. No, now
press,
it's on.
press the red one. I think it's on.
Okay. Hello again. You two, they're only here. So there's not a lot of change since July when I presented last time. There hasn't been much rain, so the precipitation it has basically stayed the same. There's still a high percent of average because normally we don't get a lot of rain in the summer. The reservoirs are continuing to obviously go down. It's a dry year, so we expect them to be pretty low. Moving on from there, I'm just going to kind of circle around and get to the middle near the end. The X2, which is a measure of the low salinity zone, is pretty far inland at beyond 81 kilometers from the Golden Gate Bridge, and that's just due to low discharge from the San Joaquin, and just there's no regulations on that right now. So there's there's high pumping and exports. This will become a factor in the fall when fall X2 regulations come in, I think actually starting next month. And then we wanted to sort of highlight sea level change in this month, and especially in 2011, there was a 7 millimeter decrease actually in sea level, and this was actually due to a recent paper that came out attributed this to sort of a perfect storm of atmospheric conditions in the Indian and Southern Ocean, which actually sequestered quite a bit of water in Australian groundwater. And actually, you can see a mass difference in the plant or in Australia during that time using satellite.
I saw that report in either Reuters or one of the Australian newspapers, and I was curious about it. Just seemed, it seemed counterintuitive, but more importantly, I was curious to learn more details about how much water was impounded and I guess retained by the Australian, do we call it a subcontinent, whatever in the dickens we call it. I mean, it must have been a massive amount of water to lead to a decline in a negative drop.
I'm not exactly sure of the volume, but I know it was a significant amount. That being said, most of it's already gone because sea level has risen since then 20 millimeters and is back on course with its 20-year average. So I can get you that number.
Yeah.
I have the article, I just didn't write that down. And then sort of a little bit different, right now in this fire season, we've had about 58,000 acres being consumed by fire. Right now, 3 of the fires in the Delta watershed, this is just in the watershed, there are fires in other areas, but these are the ones that will affect Delta rivers, like the Sacramento and San Joaquin. 3 of these fires are 95% contained, and the one near Yosemite is really the one that's kind of still, I don't want to say out of control, but not well contained at only 5%. And then we had some interesting different numbers as well. The Federal Department of Fish and Wildlife put out their waterfowl population status, and the California duck population has decreased 23% from the long-term average, which was from 1955 to 2012, and this was just due to the
1955
yes,
to 2012.
To 2012. And this is just due to just being a dry year, and there are less breeding ponds and area for them to be. The summer townet smelt abundance index is just an index of how well smelt are doing during the summer, and this is a little bit lower than last year, but is about the same as the 5-year average.
I was trading emails last week with Anka, Dr. Mueller-Solger, about the troll net stuff, and because she sends me the information, their studies as it comes in, and I said, well, thanks for the study. Do we like the results or don't like the results in English? And of course, Anka batted me around for asking a impertinent, non-scientific question. But the numbers don't automatically explain themselves.
No.
From a public policy perspective, what you look for, what I look for is it good or bad? Is it improving or declining? Whatever measures you have. And since so much of contemporary restoration activities and water system operations depends on ascertainable performance measures, I wonder whether you could figure out a way, whether it's a grade, whether it's a stoplight with a red, a yellow, a green. I understand those are dumbheaded, not sophisticated, don't fully explain all the issues, and might be misleading because things are going to change tomorrow, but they're at least more understandable. Would you give some thought to that? Because this information is helpful.
No.
But I think it could be more helpful.
I think in the particular instance of the smelt abundance, I think it's pretty on par with dry years. From what I've seen, that being said, I am not the ones doing the study. I am not an expert in it. I get these numbers.
Dr. Goodwin said you are the voice of the future in science.
I'm a geologist by training, so fish are not my thing.
The impact that scientific judgment has on public policy to a significant level is measured by its understanding by the intended audience. And if the intended audience is not public policy makers, I could understand why. But since every scientist I've ever met ever said, public policy ought to really pay attention to science. Okay, could you write it so that I could understand it?
Yeah.
And that's why a new generation of scientists, it seems to me, are spending more time on communications skills and also understandable graphics than the old traditional regression analysis, which I understand is great, but does not automatically lead to rapid understanding by a non-scientific audience.
I agree very much. It's one of the things that I try to focus on. It's making.
Okay, you're in charge.
Okay.
Yeah, straighten it up.
That's all communications of science. Okay. And then just one last number I wanted to point out is that the NIMS, National Marine Fisheries, and California Fish and Wildlife went out to do a sort of survey of the stranding of salmon in the Yola Bypass and Calusa Basin drainage, and this year they rescued about 300 salmon from the...
Over what period of time?
This was in... They did this field tour in at the end of May, so I think that's when they
did. I assume this has something to do with the plans to reconfigure parts of the Yola bypass and the application of water and so on and so forth to provide additional habitat for salmon. And I assume the fear would be, if you make it more attractive, more of them will be stranded and they'll die, which is bad.
Yeah, I believe so. And also these strandings are in areas where they don't want salmon in the bypass. Like there are the rice rice field experiments where they're trying to see if they can do salmon spawning in the same area, but in these ones, no, they want to move them out.
Okay. Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Goodwin?
Well, thank you, Emily. So no pressure there from the chair. But just one thing that folks might be interested. Okay, thank you, Emily. You just related to this communication as part of that leadership training for our science fellows. We have a lecturer, a young woman coming from MIT, who's been very heavily involved in the use of social media in some of the big science initiatives. and she will be giving a brown bag seminar on the Wednesday before your next council meeting. So that will be announced shortly.
Understandable Twitters is what she's going to be talking about?
Well, I think when Sam was setting it up with her, he called her up on the phone and he said, I'm not sure I should be calling you on the phone. Should I be tweeting you?
Yeah, right.
So if there's no questions on the lead scientist report, maybe I'll just ask you, Lauren and Rainer and maybe Lindsay, to come and sit up if there's any questions.
Okay.
What we'd like to do now is just give you a very brief overview, informational item where we are with the science plan to lay out the timeline where we'd like to go in the next 2
Members,
months.
you've got a, copy of slides that people want to use, and a copy of the second draft science plan, which none of us had a chance to read since we just got it this morning. But we intend, I gather, Doctor, to discuss this in detail at the September meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Mr. Chairman, even with your speed reading capability, you won't have had a chance to get through it this morning.
Well, I did notice that you removed the Delta Science Program peer review process from an appendix to the text of the second draft. That's all I've observed so far.
Oh, yeah. And it's also in the appendix there. That's right.
Okay.
But anyway, so what do we intend to do is just give you an information, a brief overview, what you can expect as you go through the science plan.
Mr. Fiorini has a question.
Sure.
Dr. Goodwin, I was just wondering if it might be more appropriate to break for lunch now and then reconvene and take this up when stomachs aren't growling in the audience. Of course, there's the risk of them going to sleep after a meal, too. I guess it just depends on how long.
Is that possible?
How long it would take to do the subject justice. I don't want it to be rushed.
I would say it's totally what you wish to do. We can come back after lunch, and I promise to speak softly for those who wish to sleep.
All right, I think that makes sense.
You're hungry, let's break.
Here, Mr. Knopp, here's what I'd like to do. We'll take an hour break for lunch, but I'd like to, if at all humanly possible, I want to wrap up the entire discussion, not just the science program, but today's meeting no later than 3 o'clock.
It seems quite doable.
Yeah, and I think that's possible. And that includes end of comment period, public comment as well.
Okay. And
Okay, folks in the audience, it is 2 minutes after 12. We're going to start at 2 minutes after 1. Lunch break for exactly 60 minutes. We are in recess. And also we're going to remember to pick up Ms. Pearson's legislative report at some time, which I skipped over.